chapter 3, we will continue looking at the office, the second office. There's only two. The second office in the church, that is the office of deacon or deaconess. It is one office, not two offices. It is one office, but there are two, in one sense, types or forms that make up the office of deacon. Last week, we set the background for the office of deacon, and it is seated in the person and work of Jesus Christ. How was redemption accomplished for Jew and Gentile? It was in fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy in Isaiah, the end of 52 and chapter 53, who is called the suffering servant of the Lord. It is through the servant, the anointed one of Yahweh, that salvation is purchased through his sin-atoning death. That's the background of the office of deacon, but that's also the background of every Christian. Each one of us were saved through the servant ministry of Jesus Christ. And so the church itself was started and continues to be sustained by the service, or we could say the diaconate ministry of Jesus Christ. We also learned that every Christian is called to be a servant. No Christian can imagine his life or her life to be something other than service to the Lord, and that service is directed to service to your brothers and sisters in Christ, service in your relationship to your family members, service in relationship to the ministry of the church. And so the Christian life is defined by service. Christ, in one sense, defined his own redemptive work by service. And an office exists in the church that is just called servant. That is what the word deacon means, servant. We gave the definition of a deacon. A deacon or a deaconess is an exemplary Christian of proven character, tested discernment, who serve the congregation in a distinct approved office through material and mercy ministries. Today, I want us to look at the necessary character qualifications for someone to serve in this office. I will use the phrase diaconate to refer both to deacons and deaconesses. So don't be thrown off as if I'm referring to something strange. We probably don't use that phrase diaconate too often, but I'll just use it to encapsulate both. The diaconate does consist of both deacons and deaconesses, and this is not meant to infer that they have exactly the same roles in the diaconate ministry. We'll talk more about this further, but deacons and deaconesses carry out roles that fit their gender and giftedness. If there is a leadership role within the diaconate, it would be held by a deacon. Yet there are other opportunities that a ministry of mercy and material care will call for a deaconess, and she will be the one that provides such a diaconate ministry. The commands that the New Testament gives us about a woman not teaching or exercising authority over a man are equally applied in the diaconate ministry of the church. But when I say diaconate, I will be referring both to deacons and deaconesses. This morning, we're going to group the character qualifications of deacons and deaconesses into three broad categories. It will be self-control, seriousness, and maturity. That is to say, one who is fit for this office, they are self-controlled, they are serious, and they are mature. We'll draw out what these mean, but we do need to observe two things about how we would know if someone does possess these three sort of family of character qualities. How would you know if someone is self-controlled, serious, and mature? One, Paul, in his writing, presumes that this family of character qualifications are observable by us, and they are persistent in the individual fit for the office. Paul assumes that Timothy and the congregation in Ephesus would be able to know by observation of that person's life if he is blameless, that is, without reproach. Paul also says that a deacon should be tested first before placed into the office. So therefore, Paul is able to reveal for us, he thinks that we are watching and seeing how do people do as they go through life. That is going to be how we observe their qualifications. But just because something can be observed does not mean that people are necessarily good observers. That's why Paul commands that those who seem as if they are fit for the office, they need to be tested first, then placed into the office. It is necessary that we recognize that gut feel and good old boy approaches of who can and cannot serve in the church's office is not what Paul prescribes. Observations must be made by individuals as we are able to observe their character and behavior through time and experience. This is indeed what is possible when the church functions as the way Paul says in verse 15 it is, that is, the household of God. In a family, I'm very confident, unless somehow you figured out how to be a mother or a father and have your head literally in a hole, you are able to tell the character qualities of your children. While indeed some mothers and fathers seem to be incredibly blind to the true manifestation of their sons and daughters' character, that really is not possible when the family operates as it should. The patterned behavior of our children is the display of their character. Likewise, in the household of God, in God's family, we are able to see the character qualities of individuals as we observe their patterned behavior in the church. Unfortunately, the church functions as if it is an event that you can come on Sunday morning and hear a sermon and then go to your private house only to return again 7 days later to do the same thing. We should not be surprised if those who come to hold the office of deacon, deaconess, do not have the necessary qualifications because we have failed to observe their lives, because we view the church as an event we attend as opposed to the family of God to which we belong. So let me just make sure that that firm grasp of the obvious is indeed firmly grasped by us. The church is not an event you attend. The church is the family of God to which you belong. If you do not presently relate to the church in this way, you need to repent or at least grow and begin to relate to the church indeed as it is according to the Word of God. This has practical, functional benefits for your life, and even here we see for the offices itself. The congregation and the leadership of the church needs to approach the whole life of the church not as an impersonal corporation, but rather as the family of God that does indeed have offices, formal government and structure, but also is interrelated to one another just as a family is. Each one of us as individuals and as Christian families need to realize that church is far more than just attending to hear sermons and to sing songs. Something that we do devote ourselves to for at least an hour and a half every week. But the church is also the very people to which we give ourselves in service. In this way, it is not rocket science, but just plain old observation of what is she like? What is he like? Watch patterned behavior in life together, and we will be able to observe who meets the qualities necessary to serve as a deacon or deaconess. The other assumption that Paul has as a part of these qualifications being given to us is that they're persistent. The attribute of the man fit for the office of deacon or the woman fit for the office of deaconess, they're habitual behaviors. That is to say, this is what they are, that not what they merely seem to be. If they act out of character, say you know Chris Mathiat, you watch him, you see his patterned behavior. You know Jesse Steele, you see him, you watch his patterned behavior. You know Kevin Connor, you see him, you watch his patterned behavior. You know Jerry Miller, you see him, you watch his patterned behavior. You know Garrett Page, you see him, you watch his pattern behavior. Christy Steele, you see her, you watch her pattern behavior. Holly Page, you see her, you watch her pattern behavior, all of which hold offices in our church. And if they were to act out of character, maybe act impatiently with their children, you would be able, because you have observed them and you've seen their persistent character, you would say, yeah, that was just a bad day. He acted out of character. He doesn't normally act like that. So you would be able to make such a conclusion because you have seen, I've seen how he acts. I have seen how she behaves. And that's out of step with the norm. If we can't do that, then we have to be able to say we're not able to observe what is necessary to know if someone is fit for the office. These attributes are persistent character qualities in the man or the woman fit for the office. We should see that. We therefore see that indeed it's not just cool or trendy or a way for the church to grow, to accent things like relationships. I like that community is in our church's name, Berean Community Church. But the contrarian in me, which is quite a bit, doesn't like that that's a popular word in the church today that really isn't rooted to a biblical understanding of the church. We don't do things because they're cool and hip and trendy. We do things because they are biblical and therefore necessary. And in order for us to be able to observe those who are fit for the office, we do need to have community with one another. We do need to be a communion of saints. Now, in our congregation, bylaws help us to see how this works, how community indeed enables members to nominate individuals who portray these necessary character qualities, for the elders to do their work of testing these individuals and then present these members to the church, and then for the congregation to approve, yes, they are above reproach. Brethren, in order for us to have enough of a view to be able to see how one lives so that we could judge if they're fit for the office, we need to be involved in the life of the church. I'm glad that I'm preaching to the choir. But if we don't tell these things to ourselves over and over again, then it is our nature to forget them and to drift away from them. And if we do not explicitly explain these things to our children and to those who are new in our church, then they will not understand them. And so we need to commit ourselves relationally to the life of our church. In order for us to be able to see who is fit, we need to be able to observe their persistent character qualifications. When we look at this passage, starting in verse 8, and I'm going to read through verse 13, we will see that one fit for the office of deacon or deaconess, they are self-controlled, they are serious, and they are mature. I would like to read 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 8 through 13. Deacons likewise must be dignified, not double-tongued, not indulging in much wine, not fond of dishonest gain, but holding to the mystery of the faith with a clear conscience. And these men must also first be tested, and then let them serve as deacons if they are beyond reproach. Women must likewise be dignified, not malicious gossips, but temperate, faithful in all things. Deacons must be husbands of only one wife, leading their children and their own households well. For those who have served well as deacons obtain for themselves a high standing and great boldness in the faith that is in Christ Jesus. As we make our way through this passage, we will see that the character qualities show us that one fit for the office is self-controlled, serious, and mature. We have to deal with a challenge. We'll deal with it before we get into the descriptions. So if I lose you, hopefully come back. But this is one of the most difficult interpretive issues that I think we find in the New Testament. It's not difficult because it is relating to one of the essential doctrines of salvation, such as when Peter says that baptism now saves you. At that point, we begin to say, like, whoa, what does he mean? Because now it could seem as if baptism is necessary for salvation if he's referring to water baptism. This is a difficult passage, like that is a difficult passage, but it's not dealing with one of these primary doctrines of the Christian faith. Therefore, if one differs on the interpretation of this passage, they're not differing with one another in what's called a primary doctrine. But it is difficult in that it is quite challenging to figure out, and this is where we come to verse 11. I talked a little bit about it last week. What does this Greek word in verse 11, what does it mean? What is it referring to? To whom is it referring to? And the translations that I'm sure are present in our hands today, we have differences. If you're reading from the English Standard Version, when you read verse 11, it said, "their women." If you're reading from the New American Standard Version or the Legacy Standard Bible, you see that it says women. And herein we have to deal with this, just the fact a Greek word is purposefully used by Paul that can mean women and often does mean women, or can mean wives and often does. And like any word that is used that has multiple meanings or even nuanced meanings within a family of meanings, the context where it is used determines what you should understand it to be meant, what you should understand it to mean, therefore what it meant. And I would like to tell you that this for me is like a hair split difficult issue. Like I see the argument for the other interpretation. That is the interpretation that I do not take. I see it and it makes sense. It is not difficult to see why the ESV translates the word in Greek gune to refer to the wives of deacons, their wives. Very clear in their translation. They made that interpretation, and it makes sense. It's not ridiculous. But I do think the word gune, in its most basic, sort of its normative meaning, it means women. And I do think that the New American Standard and the Legacy Standard translation, they do the best job at leaving it where the English reader now has to struggle with what is meant by this word. I also think that verse 11 not only should be translated women, but it is referring to not just a wife of a deacon, but to a deaconess. I'll give you the reasons. I'll go very fast. There's much more. We could have a class on it. But let me give you the reasons why I take this view. First, I think the most significant feature in the text for me is that Paul begins his treatment of every office with this word, likewise. Okay? Likewise. So when we when we are introduced to an overseer in verse 1 of this chapter, Paul then separates when he comes to a deacon in verse 8 this way: deacons likewise. That is, like whom? Like the overseer. And when Paul in verse 11 says women likewise, we then think likewise to whom? And I think he is referring likewise to the deacon. The women has these character qualifications. I think that is a marker in the way that Paul has rendered this passage to be able to treat those who hold the office, that is the office of overseer, restricted to only men, and the office of deacon, which has males called deacons or females called deaconesses. I think the word likewise is his indicator that makes this clear. That, for me, is the strongest argument for why verse 11 should be seen as deaconess. The women is referring to deaconesses. The second reason is that the Greek word can mean woman. And the only time it would mean wife is if the context clarifies this is the intended meaning. And indeed, that is possible here. I'm not saying that's ridiculous, that's a far stretch, not at all. It's very, very possible that the context here is, at least it's possible that it is referring to the wife of the deacon. However, Paul could have made that much clearer. He could have written in Greek, their women, but he doesn't. So, this is in part an argument based upon silence, but I think this is not something like there's a really strange way that you could say this in Greek. No, it's a very plain, normal way that you could just say they're women. And that would have absolutely sealed the deal as to who he is referring to with gune. But he didn't. The third reason that I hold to the view, again, I think this is hairline. I could serve with a big old happy heart in a church that did not have this as their position. But the third reason is that I think that in understanding gune, or in verse 11 to refer to women, is consistent with what Paul calls Phoebe in Romans 16, verse 1, a servant of the church at Syntyre. Just as he called Tychicus a servant and Epaphras a servant. They were clearly appointed servants of local congregations accomplishing a material ministry. So that's the reason I think that verse 11 is referring to women and not to wives. Again, hairline fracture. I could very, very easily be persuaded. Sometimes I wonder day to day what the view is. So it's challenging to understand, but you got to take a position. He means something. I think it's also necessary, while I do think woman is the best interpretation, though a tough one, and therefore he is referring not to the wives of deacons, but also to deaconesses. I think that there is indeed a lot of common ground that is often misunderstood today. Part of the problem is that for good reason, people are very sensitive to pastors and churches beginning to change the biblical views for men and women and the roles of the family in the church. And so when you begin to play around with saying that a woman can do what only a man can do, they rightly begin to sense like, what are you trying to smuggle in here? And so for that, I just want to make it plain. Practically, when we look at this text and what Paul teaches here, we should be able to see that no matter what one interprets gune in verse 11 to mean, women, including a deaconess, or wives only of the deacons, you will have women serving in the diaconate ministry of a local church. They will either be the women who are restricted to the wives of the deacons, or they will be women who may be single and unmarried and yet are deaconesses, along with the wives who are married to deacons. Either way, brass tacks, every church who reads this and seeks to apply it is going to have women serving in the diaconate ministry of a church. Therefore, is it strange to find churches who, in one sense, say, no, we do not have deaconesses, and yet the way that their church has appointed, approved official servants in that church's ministry to be filled by women? No, it's not strange. You can go to Tabernacle Baptist Church, and I'm pretty confident, I didn't ask Scott for any names, but I'm pretty confident a number of practical material ministries and ministries of mercy that are held down by that church are probably carried out by women that they've said, hey, you're going to oversee and apply this particular ministry of mercy and material care. And then you can go to our church and you would be able to watch and see, and you're like, wait a second, looks like exactly the same thing is happening here. So I think part of our sensitivity, which is good because people are radically trying to change what the Bible clearly teaches about the roles of men and women in the family and in the church, we should be very sensitive to those incredibly foul smells. But this actually is not going to do that when we understand what the Bible teaches about deacons and deaconesses. They're not the spiritual leaders of the church. They are not the ones teaching and correcting in the church. They are, in one sense, the hands and feet of the church that is serving in material and mercy ministries of the church. And there are always going to be not only male hands, but female hands doing that work. Either restricted to the wives of deacons, or those wives and single women who would be deaconesses. So the only two practical differences that could emerge if you take the view that I have is that a single woman who is not married to a deacon, she can be a deaconess. That's a practical difference to my view of verse 11. I think it's noteworthy to say one of the elders in our own church is not persuaded that verse 11 is referring to women, but rather the wives of deacons. And this elder has no problem whatsoever serving with a clear conscience and a happy heart. So maybe if your arms are up, like, if you're ready for a fight and a duel, maybe it's not actually as feisty as you think it is. But just to clarify, maybe pacify a few other concerns. When one is thinking about the ministry of deacons and deaconesses, one of the necessary questions that we should ask, would this lead to a deaconess exercising authority, teaching even a man, maybe even her own husband? And the answer is no. First, because deacons don't even do that. Deacons do not teach. Deacons do not exercise authority. So it's not a part of the office. Secondly, if there was a situation where the diaconate ministry of the church had to put, whether it's a meeting or instruction or something to where it begins as if, okay, this principle is now being involved, then it would be the responsibility of both that deaconess and the deacons to execute that in such a manner that it is consistent with what the Bible teaches on a woman not exercising authority over a man. So I do not see any conflict whatsoever with what the Bible clearly teaches about the roles and distinctions between men and women being compromised by having both deacons and deaconesses. It is plain and obvious when you look at the nature of the church's ministry and material and mercy aspects. Some situations God has ordained for an appointed and approved woman to go and minister for the church. And in others, it's very clear it should be done by a man. The office of deacon and deaconesses accomplish both. So let's look at the qualifications. What are the qualities of these men who serve as deacon, these women who serve as deaconess? First, they are self-controlled. Self-control is a necessary character quality of both the deacon and deaconess. Paul highlights this in his words to the deacons as well as to the women of verse 11. He does this by addressing specific areas in their life where we would be able to observe the presence or absence of self-control. The first is their speech. This is present in verse 8 and verse 11. Paul says that they are not double-tongued in verse 8. In verse 11, he says that they are not malicious gossips or slanderers. Also, of the women, he says that they are faithful in all things. Let's take double-tongued first. The man fit for the office of deacon is not a man with a double tongue. This is another way to say that he tells you the truth no matter what and no matter who you are. The man fit for the office of deacon is a man who is going to do the right thing no matter who is watching and no matter where he is. And he will tell you that. He doesn't give two messages from to this brother gets one message, to this brother they get another message. He has one version of all things because he is a self-controlled man in his speech. You can count on this man to say the same thing, that is the truth, to all people all the time. Verse 11 deals with self-control in speech, particularly applied to women. Here's also another thing. In case I didn't get you revved up enough about deacons and deaconesses and male and female and husband and wife, right? This will also get us excited. Sins of men tend to drift into certain ruts, and sins of women tend to drift into certain ruts. And so when you think about the way that righteousness in practical ways works in a man and the way righteousness works in a woman, they're going to have also different expressions, that there is unique feminine displays of righteousness and there are unique masculine displays of righteousness. And when we think of self-control in one's speech, a woman is not going to be a slanderer. Paul, a number of places, we'll see this come up later. One of the concerns that Paul has, if you are a younger widow, that is, you're young, you're physically able, you're capable, and you now do not have the necessary demands and duties that comes with being a wife and a mother. Do you know one of Paul's concerns for that Christian widow is? You're going to gossip. You're going to become a busybody. Guess what? This is a propensity of women. Sinful women have a propensity towards gossip, towards malicious slander. Right? I haven't done the demographics, but who do you think watches daytime television shows? It's a different demographic than the people who are watching shows that come on primetime. Paul is very clear here. When you see self-control manifest in a godly woman, one of the ways that you will see it manifest in her speech, she doesn't slander. She doesn't participate in malicious gossip. She shuts her mouth and she closes her ears. Now you think about the ministry of the diaconate in a church. where you are going and you're ministering to members of the church or people related to the church. You're in their homes. You're practically serving in material ways, or maybe in an opportunity where mercy is needed. What kind of woman would you want to go into that home? Surely not a woman who participates in malicious gossip. That is the last woman you would send to minister for the church's name. Paul's just saying it as it is. When a woman has self-control, it's going to be manifest in her speech. She's not a slanderer. It's also evident when he says that she is faithful in all things. All things includes speech. That when she looks at her life and she considers, I am going to live a life that is faithful to the Lord, she looks at everything in her life. And that includes what she does with her words and how she handles information. In one sense, it's going to be very easy to be able to determine who is disqualified from serving as a deacon or a deaconess. Just go and see, what do they post on Facebook? You're not qualified. You're occupied in making sure that you are able to disseminate information. Which, have you substantiated that? And is it your business to do good to that person that you continue to disseminate this information? If you don't have that figured out, then how do you know that you are not engaging in malicious gossip? The woman who is fit to be a deaconess, she knows that, and she does that. She is marked by that kind of self-control with speech. So too for the man. He's not double-tongued. Self-control is also evidenced in how you handle things like alcohol. It is necessary that do you know abstinence is an acceptable manifestation of self-control in relationship to alcohol? That's fine. No one needs to poo-poo on abstinence from alcohol as some sub-Christian approach. So, if you choose to abstain from total or complete consumption of alcohol, do not walk around with your head down. In Reformed churches, this can sometimes be sort of seen as a bad thing. Oh, I see. You haven't really come to understand things as they really are according to Scripture. And your conscience is bound, and therefore you are unable to drink wine. Even though the Bible is very clear, you can drink wine, right? Please do not do that. Do not in any way look down on a brother or sister who chooses, I don't drink any alcohol. That's indeed an application of self-control. It is not the only application of self-control. Paul's words here is not a call for teetotaling. Paul's call here, as it pertains to self-control, is that they do not drink too much. They are not a drunkard or not addicted to wine, verse 8. So here we're able to see what is the fundamental issue when it comes to the consumption of alcohol, self-control. Just like what is the fundamental issue when it comes to the consumption of too much food, self-control. What about television, video games, social media? We could go on and on and on and on. What is the issue that enables us to see that man is fit for the office? Self-control. It's self-control. And we can observe this. This is observable in our pattern behavior. The other area that Paul teaches us to look to see self-control in someone's life is their finances or their material assets. Look at verse 12. Deacons must be husbands of only one wife, leading their children. And I'm sorry, missed it. That's not where it is. Verse 8, not fond of dishonest gain. Not fond of dishonest gain. Right? If you do not have self-control when it comes to your desire for money and material possessions, you are not fit to be a deacon or a deaconess. Now, why would that be? Well, I'm sure you could talk to Jesse Steele, and he would give you quite a long list of illustrations of if you're tasked to be able to serve the church by handling literally its material assets. Do you know who counts the money in our church, deposits it into the bank, and then figures out where is it going? It's not the elders. And Jesse could chuckle right now. Good thing it's not. All right? It's the deacons. Do you want someone who is fond of sordid gain handling the money of the church? No, you do not. So you need to be able to see, is this man, is he self-controlled when it comes to his desire for material assets, money and stuff? If he's not self-controlled there, then he is not fit for the office. So self-control. Self-control is a mark of the man fit for the office of deacon or for a woman who is fit to be a deaconess. Number two, serious. Serious. This is another way to render the word that is translated dignified. Dignified. Verse 8, the Legacy Standard Bible says, deacons likewise must be dignified. You could translate that serious. Now, we tend to think that serious means the absence of fun or not lighthearted. That is not what serious means. That is not intrinsic to being dignified. We therefore, say things like, hopefully, I think we're closest to a Reformed Baptist church. I asked some of Bo's buddies, Bo, my son, who's at a Presbyterian Bible college, and have official Reformed Baptists. They're part of a Reformed Baptist church. I'm like, what would you say we are? And one of them said, I think your church might be Calvinistic Baptists. Or anyway, we can fuss around, but I'm giving you this to say, hopefully I'm punching with friends. We're friends, all right, so you can take this. All right, Reformed Baptists are not necessarily known to be a fun bunch to hang out with on a Sunday afternoon. Can I get an amen, Jerry? All right. All right, you're not going to watch the football game. At least you're probably going to be feeling guilty about it because people are making money by that football game on Sunday. All right, but my point here is somewhat a bit of comedy, but it is to say serious does not mean that you don't have fun doing lawful things. Seriousness is rather that you live life in a dignified manner. That the way that you go through life is that you understand that this is to be revered. There is a reverence that comes into how you approach life. That doesn't mean the absence of fun. Reverence lives in such a way that you do what is appropriate for the situation. A dignified man knows that I need to behave in a fitting way here, and how you would behave on Saturday when you're cheering on the Wolfpack is going to be different than the way that you would conduct yourself when you are worshiping the Lord with the church on Sunday. Is that somehow being hypocritical if you're standing and yelling and cheering because the Pack's having a great season and we're winning? Doesn't happen much if you're a Wolfpack fan, all right? And then on Sunday morning, you're controlled. Your hands are not coming up. You're not yelling and screaming, all right? You're controlled. You're listening. Is that hypocrisy? No, it is not. It's called understanding that there is a fitting way to approach each individual circumstance. And a dignified man, a serious man, knows how to do that and does that. And this way, I do think it's a real blessing to be a church in the context of the Marine Corps, because it's very difficult for us to find as civilians these contexts that still have baked in, cooked into it, dignity. About the only time it happens is you get in trouble and you have to go to court. And then it's very clear, we do still have a few places where you're supposed to be dignified. But the Marine Corps, you have these things as a part of your tradition. A dignified man doesn't need the society to tell him, do this, dress this way, act this way for the different situations that he will face. Because he is a dignified man, he is able to determine that himself, and he carries himself in a dignified way. This is what it means to be serious. Verse 11 indicates that this is also true for the woman. Look at verse 11. But temperate. Indeed, this is self-controlled, but it is applied to all these situations that you face in life. This is one of the fundamental tenets that is indeed enabling people to think that you can just act how you want to act, when you want to act, where you want to act, and if you don't do it, somebody is oppressing you. The only way that you could come with that absolute nonsense is to say that dignity and temperance aren't values. Children, let me tell you something your parents are teaching you that is very good for you. It's not fun, but it is good. And that's they are teaching you that you need to act a certain way at certain times. Not because you feel like it, but because it's required of the circumstance. You may not know what they are doing, but they are teaching you temperance. They are teaching you how to be dignified. They are teaching you that you better learn how to control yourself and how to adjust to this situation because that's what's fitting. The man who's fit to be a deacon, the woman who's fit to be a deaconess, she lives this way. He lives this way. It does mean you can still go to football games and you can scream and cheer. It means you're able to go to the beach and run around and, play in the waves and surf, right? Like, it's not a restriction on fun. It's not like there's a quota of smiles. Make sure you do not give too many smiles, right? And in that sense, this is not what dignified means. Rather, it means that we understand the circumstances, events, duties, ordinances, and doctrines that define life and the church and people's lives, and we carry ourselves consistent with those. It's a serious life. This leads us to the last area that Paul gives to us to be able to see if someone is fit for the office. And that is that they are mature. They possess maturity. Now, if you are not self-controlled and you are not dignified or serious, you are not mature. But when Paul gives maturity, he goes to certain areas that we would be able to see mature. We're going to see three: how they approach the truth, how they approach their marriage, and how they approach their children. Our maturity is going to be expressed, it's going to be shown in how we relate. First, let's look at convictions about the truth. Look at verse 9. Again, this is a deacon, does not teach, is not tasked to be able to refute those who are in error. But yet the deacon, verse 9, is to hold the mystery of the faith with a clear conscience. The man who is fit for the office of deacon is a man who is absolutely committed in his convictions to the truth of the gospel. This is not a man who is wavering. This is a man who, indeed, he knows the truth of the gospel. That is what, indeed, the mystery is. Indeed, in verse 16, Paul uses, again, the common confession, great is the mystery of godliness. And then there was this, what was said publicly by the church, a confession about Christ. Paul, again, is using mystery in the same fashion in verse 9 about what is required for one to be a deacon. That they hold the mystery of the faith with a clear conscience, that is, without doubting. The only man who is fit to be a deacon in a church is a man whose convictions about the truth are settled. The faith is the objective truths which make up the Christian faith, and he holds them. Indeed, he believes them with certainty. If you do not know the truths of the gospel, if you do not know what the Christian faith is, and if you do not hold it with certainty such that it is your convictions, you cannot serve as a deacon. Now, this is an evidence of maturity. Likewise, look at verse 12. We see that this maturity is manifest in marriage. Verse 12, referring to the deacon, deacons must be husbands of only one wife, leading their children and their own households well. Now, you would say, why doesn't it say anything about the deaconess? Well, one, the deaconess as a woman, and if she is married, a wife, she is not responsible for the household like the man is. So that's one reason Paul doesn't say this about the deaconess. The husband is responsible, and the father is responsible in a way that the wife and the mother is not. But what does he say about the deacon? The deacon, he must be the husband of only one wife. If you were going to translate this, he is a one-wife man. Now, clearly, this means he doesn't have multiple wives, but just like what is said of the elder or the overseer, he is devoted to his wife. He has a singular devotion to his wife. He has relational fidelity that is a definition, a mark of his marriage. That is indicative of a mature man, a mature Christian man who is married. Now, that doesn't mean that a deacon must be married, but if he is married, you will see his maturity manifest in his marriage relationship. Therefore, the kind of requirements, the sort of marital fidelity required of the deacon is equal to the marital fidelity required of an overseer. They're not two standards, one standard. Applied to both. Likewise, the same is true with children. He is to lead his children and his household well. Deacons must lead their children and their own households well. Number one, you see how it says their own households here in verse 12? Again, it's illustrating in Greek, Paul is able to make that explicitly clear. Whose households? Their households. Likewise, I think Paul could have said, whose women? Their women. See, he could have done that. He does it here as it pertains to the household. We are able to see the mature men among us by looking at their households. By looking at their households. Again, just like with the elder, does that mean you are able to function as a tyrant so that your households are orderly? Is that managing your household well? No, it is not. It is indicating that you have the kind of Christian maturity that enables that you are able to father and care for your children such that indeed you are managing it well. Consider the ministry of the deacon. He is going to households. He is caring for people in the many different kinds of practical challenges that Christian families will face. He is a man who needs to know, how does the family work? And he's already proven that with how he cares for his own household. So, the man who is fit, the woman who is fit for diaconate ministry in the church, they are mature. They are self-controlled. And, as you've seen, they're serious. Why would you do this? I mean, this is a fundamental problem that is wrecking our nation. People do not want to do things that lay upon them greater responsibility. Like, why would you take greater responsibility to now not only be responsible for your spouse, your children, your vocation? Why would you add to those difficulties another responsibility, and that is to be a servant? Official, approved, appointed servant of the church. Paul gives us the reason. And look at what he says in verse 13. For those who have served well as deacons obtain for themselves a high standing and great boldness in the faith that is in Christ Jesus. The reason why some of you should serve as deacons and deaconesses in our church is that you would gain a good standing before God and the saints. Paul is very clear that this is not the way in which you are saved, but there is a higher honor that is going to be given to those who serve as deacons. There is a higher honor that is going to be given to those who serve as deaconesses, and it is this motive that makes the deacon and the deaconess continue to serve. It is not temporal praise. It is not to be paraded before the church. In any way, if you want to be a deacon, you want to be a deaconess so that your name would be called before the church, you are evidencing at least a temptation that you should resist. And maybe at worst, the evidence of why you should not be one. But what will be given to you is that when everything is finished and you have fulfilled your ministry, as verse 13 says, when you have served well as a deacon, you will obtain for yourself a high standing. In this sense, I do think our eschatological expectation in heaven, the new earth, is it's not going to be equal. Those who serve the church with greater responsibilities, to greater degrees, God will give them greater rewards. And that's what motivates someone to be a deacon. Likewise, we look at the second thing that Paul says here, and great boldness. You gain confidence. That's what this boldness is. There is a gain of confidence or boldness in your position in Christ by serving in this office. Just as the Father verbally assures his Son as he continues to mature and serve his family, so the deacon is assured by his Father that comes with his continued service to God's family. It's a increased boldness or a gained confidence. Like, don't you do that, fathers? Your son does some particular task, like let's say he's cutting the grass, or I don't know, create some task, all right, that applies to your situation. And your son, he does it without being told to do it. He does it without complaining, but actually is really thrilled that he can help the family. He does it well. What do you say to him? You did well, son. Your daughter, the way she's handling some of the necessary chores, and she does it, again, without asking. She does it to the best of her ability and with a cheerful heart. What do you say to her? You have done so well. This is the kind of confidence that is gained by serving in this office. This is why you serve in this office. Is it so that in the last day and the new world that will follow, you know you have served God by serving his household in ministries of material care and mercy. So this is who can be a deacon or deaconess. Chris is going to come and close us. If you have questions, I imagine there's a lot. I'll stand up here and we'll take as many of those questions that we can. My family is going to California this week to be a part of a memorial service